October 2018. Rockstar Games co-founder Dan Houser casually mentioned in an interview that his team had been working 100-hour weeks to cross the finish line on their latest project. What was intended as a boast of legendary dedication instead ignited a global firestorm, exposing the brutal, grinding machinery behind the most expensive piece of entertainment ever produced. Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't just break sales records, it broke people. It was an $800 million gamble that spent 8 years in production, utilizing the collective labor of thousands of creators across every Rockstar studio on the planet to simulate a world so detailed it felt sentient. But beneath the breathtaking vistas and the cinematic scores lies a story of obsessive perfectionism that pushed the limits of technology and human endurance to their absolute breaking point. This is the bloody, beautiful truth behind the death of the American frontier. To understand why Red Dead Redemption 2 blew everyone away, you have to understand the landscape it was born into. By 2018, the open-world genre had become a checklist. Players were used to the Ubisoft formula: climb a tower, reveal a dozen icons on a map, and spend 40 hours vacuuming up collectibles like a digital janitor. It was efficient, it was profitable, and it was becoming hollow. Rockstar Games, the undisputed kings of the sandbox, decided to burn the rulebook. They didn't want to give players a playground, they wanted to give them a second life. The scale of the ambition was staggering. They didn't just build a map of the American West, they built a clockwork universe. They simulated the way snow deforms under a horse's weight, the way a dead carcass decays over actual days of play, and the way the pupils of a character's eyes dilate based on the light in the room. This wasn't just game design, it was a digital recreation of reality that bordered on the psychotic.
It was a level of detail that no other studio could afford, and perhaps no other studio would be crazy enough to attempt. But the real magic wasn't in the technical specs, it was in the friction. Most games are designed to be as convenient as possible, stripping away the mundane to get to the fun. Red Dead Redemption 2 did the opposite. It forced you to slow down. It made you manually clean your firearms lest they jam in a gunfight. It made you loot every pocket of a fallen enemy with a slow, deliberate animation. It made you feed your horse, brush its coat, and earn its trust. This was a direct assault on the short attention spans of the modern gamer. Rockstar was betting that if they made the world heavy enough, players would finally feel the weight of their actions. The protagonist, Arthur Morgan, was the vessel of this weight. Unlike the chaotic, immortal protagonists of Grand Theft Auto, Arthur was a man who felt the ticking of the clock. He was a relic of a dying era, an outlaw in a world that was rapidly being fenced in by the telegraph and the railroad. As the game progressed, the tragedy of the Vanderlinde gang became a slow-motion car crash that players were forced to participate in. You weren't just playing a story, you were mourning a way of life. The narrative didn't just provide missions, it provided a psychological profile of a man realizing his entire existence was built on a lie. Yet this narrative depth came at a price that the consumer rarely sees. The 2,000-page script and the 500,000 lines of dialogue were etched into the game through a culture of relentless pressure. Rockstar's pursuit of the ultimate experience created a vacuum that sucked in the lives of its employees.
While players marveled at the way Arthur's beard grew in real time, the people making that beard grow were reportedly missing their children's birthdays and sleeping under their desks. The industry was forced to look in the mirror and ask, Is this level of detail worth the human cost? The world itself was the true star. It was an ecosystem that didn't need you. An eagle would swoop down to catch a fish in a stream, whether you were watching or not. A shopkeeper would remember if you robbed him 3 weeks ago and greet you with a bandage on his head and a shotgun under the counter. This persistent memory created a sense of consequence that shattered the illusion of the NPC. These weren't just puppets with 3 lines of dialogue, they were inhabitants of a world that felt like it had existed long before you arrived and would continue long after you left. However, the but in the Red Dead story is the sheer arrogance of its design. By choosing realism over convenience, Rockstar alienated a segment of the gaming public. To some, the game was a masterpiece. To others, it was a cowboy walking simulator that felt sluggish and unresponsive. The controls were heavy, the movement was deliberate, and the animations were unskippable. It was a bold middle finger to the instant gratification culture of modern gaming. Rockstar wasn't asking for your time, they were demanding your life. This uncompromising vision extended to the game's economy and pacing. Money was hard to come by, and the things you wanted to buy were expensive. You had to hunt, you had to fish, and you had to contribute to the gang's camp. It was a survival game disguised as an action-adventure. The camp itself was a masterclass in social engineering. You would sit by the fire and listen to hours of organic conversation that most players would never even hear.
The developers wrote and recorded entire backstories for side characters that some players would just walk past without a second glance. This was the ultimate flex of creative and financial muscle. But the industry was changing. As Red Dead Redemption 2 reigned supreme as a single-player triumph, its online component struggled to find the same footing as its predecessor, GTA Online. The very thing that made the single-player game great, its slow, deliberate pace, became a liability in a multiplayer environment designed for quick loops and microtransactions. You can't sell flying motorbikes and laser guns in 1899. The dark truth of the Red Dead legacy is that it might be the last of its kind, a gargantuan single-player epic that values atmosphere and slow-burn storytelling over the live service model that has since cannibalized the industry. We look back at 2018 as a turning point. Red Dead Redemption 2 showed us what was possible when a corporation with infinite resources decided to chase a singular, obsessive vision. It blew everyone away because it felt like it shouldn't exist. It was too big, too detailed, and too sad for a mainstream blockbuster. It didn't just push the envelope, it tore the envelope to shreds and threw it into a highly rendered campfire. The game's ending is perhaps the most profound moment in digital history. It doesn't end with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing realization of mortality. It forces the player to inhabit the consequences of their choices, transitioning from the violent life of Arthur Morgan to the domestic, doomed struggle of John Marston. It is a cycle of violence that players know will eventually end in the tragedy of the first game. It is a masterpiece of dramatic irony, a story where the player is the architect of their own heartbreak. But even today, the shadow of its production looms large.
Every time a new AAA game launches with bugs, empty worlds, or predatory monetization, the ghost of Red Dead Redemption 2 returns to haunt the conversation. It remains the benchmark that no one can hit, not because other studios lack the talent, but because they lack the terrifying singular focus of a company willing to burn $800 million and a decade of human life to ensure that the light hits a whiskey bottle exactly right. It is a monument to what happens when art and corporate greed collide. It is a beautiful, suffocating, and ultimately tragic experience that redefined what an interactive medium could achieve. It didn't just raise the bar, it moved the bar to another planet. And yet, the industry is still recovering from the impact. We are still debating whether we want our games to be fun or if we want them to be as heavy and complicated as life itself. October 2018 wasn't just a release date, it was a funeral for the old way of making games and a birth of a new, terrifying standard. Rockstar Games built a digital cathedral, but they did it on a foundation of sweat, controversy, and a refusal to compromise. They gave us a world where you could get lost in the mountains for days, only to find a small, heartbreaking story hidden in a discarded letter. They gave us a world that felt more real than the one outside our windows. This is the story of a game that was too big to fail and too heavy to carry. This is the tragic, soaring truth behind Red Dead Redemption 2.